Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather forecast for AgSouth Farm Credit. Now, in today's forecast video, we're going to do a little bit different start to this video. What we're going to focus on is what happened a year ago, because on May 10th, 1 year ago, we saw a pretty significant pattern change. And I'm going to see if there's anything in the near-term forecast that's going to do the same, break the pattern away from where it's currently been. Just because a year ago right now is when I started to lose sleep at nights, trying to figure out when the pattern was going to go back to what it was in spring. Now, with all that being said, I want to tell you where I'm taking this forecast after that. We're going to review the recent rains we had this week, which most certainly outperformed model expectations a week ago. We want to talk about where the pattern goes after that with respect to delivering more rain into parts of the southeast. I then want to stretch this out at the very end. That's going to talk about another look at 2020 as an analog year, and we're going to look at some of the new model data that I was excited to share with you a week ago. So feel free to grab that slider bar and scoot ahead to parts you want to see, but I've been showing you, you've been staring at a map that shows you the pattern we broke away from last year. And from April 1st through about May 10th, this was the most dominant feature. And what it was slowly doing was eroding the position and strength of the Bermuda High, splitting it up into kind of three pieces right here. And the Pacific High lived in this area. And because of that particular pattern, the way this began to kind of set itself up, we saw a jet stream flow that did this. Kind of came over across the northern tier of the United States, something like that. And the subtropical jet came in from the inside, which means we left this area right into where I just drew that circle kind of in the lurch. And what that means is this is what the precipitation patterns last spring, April through May 10th, looked like. And we were wet. We had plenty of moisture last spring. The dryness was here as the flow went around it, some to the north and some to the south. Temperature-wise, it wasn't overly warm. We were a little bit warmer along the coast of North Carolina compared to average, but nearly everywhere else, AgSouth territory was near normal to slightly cooler than average last spring. Now, what happened was that on May 10th, that big trough that was sitting here that split the Bermuda High just kept going north. And it made one piece of the Bermuda High sit over parts of Europe, and it strengthened on the backside the ridge that lived in Canada. And what was critical about this was the flow that came around last year out of the north and east around that. And the results of all of that meant that the jet stream flow did something like this. You see, anomalously, the mid-level atmosphere had a trend toward giving us winds that came down out of the north and east. And that changed everything about the precipitation pattern. We spent, again, April 1 through May 10th looking like this. And by the time that pattern settled in, look how much drier it was in parts of the Northeast. And this encroached in on parts of North Carolina. Now, the farther south you went into AgSouth territory, the wetter it got because of a frontal boundary that just lingered right in through here, on which we saw incredibly wet weather. And that hit a lot of AgSouth territory in Georgia and parts of South Carolina. Why was it so wet in the western cotton belt and then up the front range of the Rockies? When you bring flow around like this, it's very dry for the Midwest, but this is all upslope. So as soon as it got here, the air was forced to rise and any moisture that was in it was squeezed out. And because of all of this might just take a second to load here. Canada burned 18.5 million hectares of land burned. And do you remember all the smoke? Now, this is just a snapshot on May 16th a year ago, just to show you where some of that smoke was. But do you remember the smoke that settled into the United States throughout the entirety of spring into early summer from those from those northern fires in Canada? All right, I'm thinking about all of that because this is where we've been for the last few weeks, April 20th to May 7th. It's not so much of a story in the Atlantic. I know there are some important features here, but the main feature has been this. This is what's driven our pattern. This is a much stronger than normal Pacific High. And what we've had is flow that's come around it south of the Aleutian Islands. It's dipped into the west, and it's rolled through just like this. And this is what caused some of the early, remember back in April, the early dry conditions we saw Virginia, North Carolina. We kept talking about that. Like, hey, there's weaker high pressure that keeps living in our area, limiting the precipitation. Now that began to shift because this high pressure cell was nowhere near as strong as it's been in certain other springs, which is why lately we started to break that down. But if you look now, this is our precipitation ranks by climate district since April 20th. And we've been extremely wet up the midsection of the country. There is an area that's in here that's drier. That's going to be changing here very, very soon. And while we've had at times some drier weather, we just had big storms roll through here in the last 24 hours. And we started to beat back the drought risk that had been building into North Carolina, even parts of Virginia, with some recent storms that have come through. We just want to know, where is it going in the near term? because I think there's a pretty big failure mode on this upcoming pattern, and we need to talk about it. So as of yesterday, Thursday, May the 9th, this is the last 30 days looking at percent of normal precipitation. And if you just take note of the color bar, we make the flip over to 100% in these light blues. So this is up to 3 times normal precipitation. And then we're getting in parts of Texas, some places are 6 to 10 times normal precipitation. It just rained in here, which is not shown on this map. It's not. Okay, that was yesterday's storms that came through here. This only goes through yesterday morning. And then we've lately had better rains that have gotten into those really dry parts of North Carolina, starting to fix the drought issues there. All right, where's it going? And what's this failure mode I keep talking about? Here's the trough of colder air that's currently in place. That's in the upper levels of the atmosphere. That's what's kept things unsettled, especially down here in the southeast and the severe storms over southern Georgia and Florida early this morning. We got to watch this one, though, because this western ridge that comes in has got flow going like this, and this guy right here is going to move over the next 4 days toward us. Now, if this ridge stayed in the northwest, this whole upcoming forecast would look different. And Monday, Tuesday, and even Wednesday of this week, I really had myself convinced that that ridge was going to stay there. You say, why does this even matter? What's going on? This is your upstream flow. So what we have to watch is where it goes. So through Sunday into Monday and Tuesday, we're going to watch that low come out right there. And it's going to bring some wet weather to the south. That's going to get into the southeast by the time we get toward mid to end of week. That ridge that was over the Pacific Northwest moved. And what it does is by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, gives us a broad trough of low pressure here. And just say, what does that mean? That means flow comes in like this. And that kind of flow continues to keep unsettled weather across the whole of the south, including the southeast. This is Thursday, getting into Friday, Saturday, Sunday of next week. And this ridge that was over the northwest failed to stick around. It's now back here. And as a consequence, the pattern goes back into something we've seen a bit of. And that's by May 21st, ridging trying to happen here, troughs digging into the west and flow coming across. Here's the big difference. There's no big southeast ridge anymore. We've had that kind of showing up at times, and now it's no longer in the flow. And as a result, once we get out there past the next 10 to 12 days, we have big questions out of the end of May shapes up. And I'm going to come to that right when I get to about this slide right here, okay? I'm going to show you what I think might happen. But this was, if you had asked me to give you the forecast on Monday, I would have been telling you that this whole pattern was about to make a flip about, not like it did a year ago, but at the same time it did a year ago. All right, with all of that being said, what are we dealing with? Well, this morning we have the severe thunderstorm watch that's out here. We've had tornadoes down here. We've had strong straight line wind damage. This has been rough, but that front's clearing through pretty quickly. And if you just have a look at it, behind it, we've got temperatures that have cooled off a bit, up to 7, 8, 9, 10 degrees, near normal, where it was yesterday up in parts of North and South Carolina. But there's a cold front that's still lingering to your north that's sneaking through. But these storms yesterday, just take a look at this. This is just going through last night. This is not including the storms that blew up overnight, but just before the sun set, look at the size of the storms down here. And then these big, big hailers that came through parts of Texas. If you look back at the storm reports, this was just from yesterday alone. A lot of wind reports in parts of Georgia, getting into South Carolina, and then the big hail was back here farther to the west. And if you have a look at it, this is where I measured hail just over the last 3 days, from the 7th through this morning on the 10th. A lot of hail in these storm systems. We're above average on tornadoes, we're well above average on wind reports, and we're now above average on hail. So what did the last 7 days do? It certainly outperformed every model forecast I gave you last Friday. We knew rain was coming, but if you take a look at it here, we've got parts of Tennessee with those storms that came through midweek that got into North Carolina, South Carolina, parts of Georgia, that put down 4, 5, 6 inches of rain. Very, very heavy rain here just in the last 7 days. In fact, it's hard to find a spot across the country that missed out on recent precipitation. That's with exception. There are parts of Kansas missed out on it, Colorado, getting up here. There's spots, but this is a wet look at where we've recently been. So where are we today? Well, right along the North and South Carolina border, we're watching out for severe storms. This is already moving through early this morning with respect to severe storms, but finally we get into the weekend, things calm down a bit. It's all going to be about how long it takes this low that's going to live over parts of Arizona to get back over to us. So that's the 11th on Saturday, and this is Sunday. So we kind of get into this weekend relatively unscathed. But before we get there, take a look. 9 o'clock this morning, playing through the middle of the day. We just need to watch late today. right in this corridor for the risk of strong to severe storms. So keep an eye out in this area. Keep radar available. Hang on to weather.gov to make sure you can see any watches or warnings that show up. But that clears out by tonight, and into Saturday we go. And there's this front I told you that was to your north that kind of sneaks through. But all of your attention actually should be over here. Out ahead of this low, there's plenty of moisture getting pulled into this part of Texas. That's a big section of our cotton belt getting a little bit of drink here. And as we play forward, maybe as we get into Saturday night, see this? Some scattered showers, Virginia, North Carolina. And then as we work our way into Sunday and then eventually into Monday, it's just going to be a waiting game. When does this get here? But take a look at your next 7 days according to the artificial intelligence forecasting system. It's extremely wet along the Gulf Coast. But overall, we're looking at a pretty decent chance of getting some moisture into this area. Here's the forecast from the National Blend of Models. Decent ½ to 1 inch chance. Wettest conditions down here in southern Georgia. This is the WPC, very similar forecast. Maybe some places picking up in the WPC forecast. See this contour line? That's 1.5 inches. And if we switch over to the latest European model forecast, it shows the storms kind of on repeat. We've got chances of wet weather. Once we get past this weekend and early into next week, it's going to start to get stormy again. And finally, this is the GFS model forecast. Probability-wise, over the next 10 days, what's the chance of getting 1 inch? Well, across nearly all of AgSouth territory, 80 to 100%. If we step it up to 2 inches, now we're looking at a 50 to 80% chance here, and in southern Georgia, over a 90% chance. And the really wet weather is going to linger right in through here. That means that parts of AgSouth territory down here in Georgia has a 40 to 60% chance of seeing 4 inches of rain in the next 10 days. Are we drier? No. The chances of staying below all of this, below a ½ inch, is 0. So I think we're going to get some good moisture coming through, beating back, and the reason I'm thinking about this is just beating back the risk of drought. All right, let's watch it on the European model. We've already kind of taken a look at Saturday into Sunday. We know that once we get into Sunday and the front clears, we've got just a waiting game for when this low gets here. It's moving through Texas on Monday. Gets toward us on Tuesday, early Tuesday morning rain down in southern Georgia. We then play this through the rest of the day on Tuesday. Scattered showers and storms through Wednesday. See it just lingering there? Watch this again. This is Monday morning, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's the upper level low that's living over Arizona finally getting here. By midweek next week, there's a trough that digs into the Midwest. And behind it, this is Thursday into Friday, we have another chance of getting storms into our area, supported by the subtropical jet. So when is that? That's next Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and that clears by Sunday. So you see multiple chances just in the next while here, next 10 to 15 days, of getting decent moisture back into this area. If you look at the 10-day precipitation anomaly forecast from the European model, it's projecting some places down here. Now, this is just one model run, but having an excess of 3 to 4 inches of rain. And it's mostly right along the Gulf Coast. Looking out there into week 2, because that second system is next week, like next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that's when we see the wetter conditions coming back through the same area. All models show that. Temperature-wise, this is where we've been for the last week. We've had above normal temperatures while much colder air settled into the northwest. That is the pattern I want to know if it's going to come back. Not frost, we'll do that next. This is GDDs. Where do we sit since April 1 on the accumulation of GDDs? Generally speaking, we're looking somewhere around 20 to up to 80 GDDs above average. We've had some warmth. The west is what's been struggling to get some warmth in place. Now let's look at frost. No frost risk. That's good. What are the temperatures going to do? Well, here's Friday's highs. Getting into Saturday, cooler air right behind that front, some cooler conditions. Sunday, much closer to average. Getting into Monday, that's when the low is moving toward us. So here it is. That's cooler conditions on Tuesday when the low's sitting over us and it's raining. Then we watch that move out. The next trough moves into the Midwest and tries to work its way toward us next weekend. So as we go and look out there, day 5 through 10, we see the cooler air coming into the central United States in the GFS, warmth out west. But the models don't agree on this. You see, the GFS wants to keep more mild conditions in the west, while cooler air tries to come back in, not cold, but cooler air for mid to late May. The European model says, you know what? I don't think that we get that same kind of pattern. There's day 5 through 10 and day 10 through 15. Notice how it's not as cool in here. It keeps the cooler air in the northwest. If that's the case, then the jet stream comes in like this and runs around like that probably, and that changes our whole outlook for the remainder of the month of May. Now, speaking about the remainder of the month of May, this is what the newest mid-May all the way into mid-June precipitation outlook features from the European model. And it went wet. I mean, you can see here that it's got very wet conditions for parts of AgSouth territory. And one of the big reasons for that is that it's failing to build in high pressure and leave it over the northwest. And so later on today, the CPC will update their forecast for the end of May and the beginning of June. I want you to go look at it, cpc.ncep.noaa.gov, or just Google Climate Prediction Center and you'll get it. We need to see how this is going to evolve. Now, with the chance of this actually verifying, do we start to just really push down the road any risk we have of developing drought in the southeast? Because you know that's one of my 3 areas I'm worried about here, here, and here for summer drought development. And what we just saw is that all of this area is getting a good drink of water right now, saying, where is this drought going to be? Can I provide you with some kind of new insights? I want to take you back to ocean temperatures. El Niño's done. It's out. We can see the trade winds have resumed, cooler water surfacing. So what else do we need to watch? Where the Pacific high has lived for the last, month and a half, the ocean temperatures have warmed up here. And what I want to know is how far into this area do those warm temperatures move? And does this stay cooler while the Atlantic main development region stays warm? And the reason I have those questions is because something like that happened in 2020, where the water stayed cooler here, the warmer water to the north of it pushed into the Gulf of Alaska into the Gulf Coast. Not the Gulf Coast, the West Coast. And we had a weak La Niña with warm Atlantic Ocean temperatures. When that occurred in 2020, we got this pattern. We saw a large ridge anchor in summer. This is what summer is, June, July, August, over the southwest. So the flow came over the top and it just stormed all through this area. Nothing to prevent, like a big ridge, nothing to prevent the rain. Summer 2020 was a wet one. Summer 2020 was actually not even that hot compared to historical. It's not like it didn't get hot at certain days, but it didn't register on the hotter side of the distribution. All the heat was here. And why I bring this up is simply because of this. Some of the new forecasts for El Niño moving toward La Niña have become a bit more aggressive. It's not like it's calling for full-blown mega La Niña, but the European model went from neutral in its forecast in April to now weak La Niña in its May update. And that looks something like this for summer, June, July, August. So take note, there's the weak La Niña surfacing, there's the warm Atlantic, there's the cooler water off the coast and the warmer water nosing in. Now, what happens is that model did this. It attempted to put some sort of ridging here and storms cascading all on this side of it ahead of an active hurricane season, which I do think this is a year of Gulf Coast hurricanes. Now, surprisingly, the model went a bit dry here. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was an initialization problem, but I wouldn't look at that and put any weight into it at this point because I want to compare it to the new forecast that just came out from the National Multi-Model Ensemble. Look, cooler, La Niña, stronger, warm Atlantic, active hurricane season, warmer water, not quite as far into the Gulf of Alaska and up against British Columbia's coast as the European, but it's not exactly that different of a pattern. And this is what it did. It took a lot of the dryness in the forecast out of the Corn Belt it had in the previous runs. It still kept you near normal and stormy. And it kept this area hot and dry, which meant storms cascade over the top, and we get something like that. That's a lot of consistency in these forecast models. Are they good? No, they're not good. They're not. I mean, if they were good, I would just simply show you the map and say, this is what's going to happen. We need to watch those ocean temperatures and their evolution to understand what this summer is going to look like. And then how does the following August, so September and October, turn into our hurricane season? August, September, October for that matter. Still have risk of an above average hurricane season. Now, before I give you one more map on this longer range, which will be global, I want to give you a quick near-term global update. Just take note of what's going on throughout Europe right now. Very stormy in Western Europe, but notice got drier finally over parts of Ukraine. Wetter conditions are trying to move into some drought-stricken acres here east of the Black Sea in a part of the Russian wheat belt that's been very, very dry. But we got to talk about the temperatures there next. Very wet throughout Indonesia. The flooding that's been south of the Yangtze starts to shift farther to the south and west, and some early season rains coming into India. Meanwhile, in Australia, New South Wales, which is here, Queensland to the north of it, and Victoria looking at some more showers off of easterly flow. But the interior is getting quite dry, like in South Australia. South America, more flooding coming into Rio Grande do Sul. Some places here have seen 8 to 18 plus inches of rain, some places over 20 that have been in Rio Grande do Sul lately. They don't grow a safrina crop there. This is full season crop. The safrina crop region had the monsoon shut down about 2 weeks early, and it's going to continue to stay dry there. Argentina is getting a chance to dry out as well, which will help with harvest efforts. If you look out there in the temperature pattern, cold air is coming into Argentina. We'll get a frost in Buenos Aires and Cordoba. Very cold air sitting over a broad section of Russia right now, too. Got to keep a close eye on that. But one last thing to think about is an international update for summer. And while we see an active Indian monsoon, wet throughout most of China, very wet throughout Indonesia and Australia, take note that the probability map, looking at the dryness here versus the southeast, that's where the stark contrast exists, and that's what we're going to be watching out for as we go forward. So that's all I got for you today. Hopefully that update provides some context on where I think we're going, both in the near and the long term, and certainly sheds some light on what happened a year ago and comparing to this year. But you all have a great weekend. We'll pick this up again next Friday. Thanks.